Issue 66. Why does Knuckles waste time counting down from 3? Why can't he and the Chaotix instantly run at the Rogues? Jet has a good sense to want to split up the loot. He tells Storm to toss him and wave the relics as they're, I guess, magnetically stuck to their airboards above him. But how do they have the time to say all this? This took a couple of seconds for them, and with how close Knuckles was to Storm, Knuckles would be hitting Storm right now. The only way they could have the time to say all of this would be if Knuckles stood still for no reason. The artist should have drawn this as showing Storm dodging Knuckles' punch. Instead, I'm baffled from the first scene as it somehow managed to even screw this up. Everyone who played as Knuckles knows that he is not so slow in the games that he wouldn't have had time to stop Storm from throwing the relics upwards just to drag out things, when realistically he'd have gotten them all punched to the ground and knocked out in seconds. Knuckles runs fast enough to go through loop-de-loops in the games. The fans of this comic love it because due to the absence of SAT-AM concepts, it seems to be faithful to the games. But this isn't. This makes it hard to believe this is being written by a Sonic fan, because the only way things would have gotten to this point would be if IDW took place in another canon where Knuckles never went on an entire adventure where he had to go through loop-de-loops, whether it's Sonic 3 or Heroes. He's literally 4 feet away from Storm. There's no reason to have an entire fight scene because the Rogues aren't likable as a whole. So I think everyone would be fine with simply seeing them punched and knocked to the ground, especially if it takes multiple hits to knock them out. But no, the last issue had to end its story on a cliffhanger so people would be expecting an entire fight scene when the next issue happens, when it could have easily had them get punched out there. Again, Knuckles should be guarding the Master Emeralds right now, not valuing relics over it. But this would make no sense in canon either way, because the other characters behind him are also fast enough to run through loop-de-loops. And I doubt Espio doesn't have super speed in the IDW canon, although what he did there was so forgettable that I don't remember if he used it. So in the IDW universe, Vector, Espio, and Charmy are slow as well, so they never went on an adventure in its version of Heroes at all. So Eggman got free of the vault later there. At least it was realistic enough to have Charmy effortlessly steal back the relic from Jet because he can fly. He gets told he was stealing and apologizes giving it back to him. The perfect example of how extremely dumb he writes the characters to be. Not even Fleetway Charmy would do this. I could have understood this happening though if Jet got the chance to explain that as a relic, Knuckles doesn't legally own it or need it, and he's being selfish by not letting the Rogues make money off it. It isn't useful for anything but being sold, and if Knuckles gets it back, if Eggman really wanted the relics, he could just go back to Angel Island to steal them back whenever. Well, if the Rogues stole the relics, Eggman might never know where to go find them, because maybe the one who bought it wouldn't want to admit they bought something on the black market, and he didn't really care about the relics, so he would have only gotten them back on the way through digging through Angel Island and searching for other stuff. He wouldn't go out of his way to look for the person who bought the relics. It all depends on whether Angel Island is officially under the legal jurisdiction of Knuckles, and I doubt it because he's not a mayor. Since nobody but Knuckles lives there and it's over the ocean, I'd assume it falls under maritime law. So no living government would own it, and Knuckles saying he owns it would have as much legitimacy as saying that you own some moon dust because you found it on the moon. Especially if you say you own it because you're descended from Buzz Aldrin or something. As for yelling Charmy's name after this can make this a funny joke if you're in the right mood. But it's character-breaking humor for Charmy. There was only one line as far as I remember where the games established him as very stupid, where he asked what's a top secret disc, when he'd know what all those words mean. But he's usually not that stupid, so it's the exception. This action would get him scolded by his friends, but that's the only thing that makes it stupid, and doing something isn't bad just because your friends would disapprove. I don't know if Vector would have the guts to ground Charmy. I think he'd throw a tantrum and he knows that, so I can understand him thinking the right thing to do is worth a minor scolding. But still, it's not established that Charmy cares this much about society's idea of morality and would instantly sympathize with thieves because he's easily manipulated in a way that doesn't appeal to his selfishness. And besides, why couldn't Jet have simply rammed Insem with his airboard and taken the relic from him? Fans hate him, so if the writer really cared about fan service, he would have a lot of slapstick against him, and Jet and Storm, which is all I'm excited for. Espio jumps on the airboard and he asks Jet if he could handle heavy turbulence, implying that he's the one who's causing the airboard to spin. The only way it could cause it to spin is if he was super fast, and then he would have crashed into Storm and started beating him up while Jet was giving him the plan. Charmy worries about Espio while the ocean splashes. Wave's concern over Jet gets punished by Vector getting the chance to bite her board. To be fair, she should care about Jet, but it's a shame her compassion backfired on her. I like that Vector tried to talk, but I don't think anyone would hear. That airboard has to be the best made thing for Vector to not instantly chomp a piece off it with his fangs, because he can bite robots and damage them. Storm lands the first punch on someone who's faster than him. I've always assumed that Knuckles is only fast when running or gliding, and he's close enough to him that he wouldn't get to start running and therefore take advantage of his speed to hit faster anyways. Still, I question the logic of the least liked character getting the first hit in and dodging the attack, which maybe he wouldn't have if Knuckles hadn't risked getting hit by wasting time with the one-liner. You'd think Guardian training would discourage that. I hate that it damages the dog, because someone's gonna have to pay for that, and I bet the writing won't have the tact to have it be him, even though it'd show him being a hero. Why is Storm dazed? Why the hell can Vector talk properly now when his mouth is so close to the airboard? Shouldn't he be muffled? Plus, the mouth was drawn awkwardly anyways. It should have shown him from behind instead to hide it. Wait, first it showed him as having all of his teeth be gold, and now they aren't? He threatens her that the airboard might be thrown off balance, so she agrees to land, and Jet agrees to let Charmy take the relic while already exhausted, just because the airboard smashed into the ocean. And I did get to see Espio land a single punch on him. Is the fight seriously over without me getting to see a single attack against Jet and Storm? How in the world could the writing be this clueless? Why bother showing a fight against unlikable characters this way? At least there was variety in what happened, with each character being handled a different way, so that it feels like it took effort to think up. But it's not a good story if it just leaves you mad afterwards at the missed opportunity. Vector left bite marks on her airboard, so it wasn't that well built after all, and Vector wants to find out who hired the rogues, so he threatens to have Espio steal their airboard, and Jet says he doesn't know the name of who hired them. I assume the story is still going to reveal who hired them, and that it'll be someone we knew before, or this would be really unsatisfying. Knuckles gets threatened by Storm and says he'll take him down anytime. So this uses their rivalry against each other. I can't help but be surprised by this though, because I feel like he's been more level-headed and not so much a hothead. Somehow Jet tells him no instead of not caring and just riding home on his airboard without him. I guess he doesn't want him to get hurt. And Wave says she has fixing to do. I guess the real reason is she cares about him too, because this doesn't conflict with it. It would be inconvenience being down one member. So I'm just mad at the story refusing to show an actual fight between them. One attempt at an attack on both sides is not a fight, especially not for 7 pages. When you have that little focus on action, you need substance more than ever. How about telling me the history of this place? Because I don't care about it yet. I feel like it's a ghost town. Vector asks for pay, and Knuckles says he could give him fruits and mushrooms. And Espio says free groceries are savings. It would have been interesting if Knuckles did have money, because then they'd have to come up with an excuse for why he does. So of course that wasn't revealed. Why would the government ever pay him a huge cash reward for helping to save the world? The saving of the world in SC2 was broadcast on TV to tons of people, and you'd think Sonic would have been interviewed and given Knuckles some credit, but nope, he's an egomaniac, or the government only wants to reward Sonic. Surprisingly, Vector wasn't aware that it wasn't just him who was invited to Vanilla's house. You'd think she would have told him right away that she was inviting his friends too, to make him look forward to seeing his friends. Why does Knuckles call the Chaotix weirdos right now? Sure, they have special powers and Charmy isn't being raised by his parents, but that's all. Then Knuckles asks how he gets home because that's how stupid he is in this canon. Oh yeah, Knuckles has never gone back to Angel Island after leaving it in the entire history of the planet. Yeah, because he never left the islands in the adventure games or Heroes, and he was never in Generations, or Lost World, or Frontiers. How did the adventure games and Heroes even conclude their stories without Knuckles leaving the island? They happened in IDW, right? How did he come home after he left the island to be the leader of the Resistance? Well, we saw it in the comic, so we definitely remember that. Isn't it obvious he could get Tails to fly him home on his plane? It's like he got brain damage so he can't remember the most important thing he needs to, no matter how many times it happened. Now I'm forced to assume that's what happened to him. Jet contacts his boss, and Storm begins to say he told the Chaotix something, and it turns out he lied. Jet doesn't deserve any compliments in-universe, and Storm doesn't deserve any politeness to him either. Was it really necessary to show him complaints to his boss about this? He says he plans to keep Knuckles distracted with the rogues and steal the relics again. Wouldn't it be nice to see another opportunity for him to get his face punched in? Instead, his boss, who talks in an off-puttingly formal way, says that he doesn't want the relics because he only uses the rogues as a distraction for the Chaotix. Finally, it really makes sense that he asks them to do all this. You can't brag to people that you bought a relic you're not allowed to have. You never know if they might call the cops. Oh, of course it's Clutch, because the writers are too lazy to come up with new villains most of the time, until they feel like they're out of ideas for the moment. And it really shows how similar the IDW villains are, because he talks just like Starline, and he talks just like Mimic. Why does Jet even care that he was used? Of course he was using him. He was trying to get his help. And he's right in front of Jewel. So it sure is a shame for her that none of her friends told her about Clutch. It could make sense that they didn't want to interrupt her important paperwork to warn about someone she was unlikely to meet, but no reason to inconvenience the Resistance itself because Amy, Shadow, and the Chaotix aren't a part of it somehow, despite being playable characters. Clutch makes a business agreement with Jewel as the story ends. I assume she just doesn't pay attention to any news because it's too depressing, and that's why she didn't see his face on the news as someone who definitely would have been arrested for chow abuse, and who had all of his possessions seized by the government, which must be for a crime. I understand that being too boring to be reported on because it's not a violent, immediately shocking crime. But Cream would have told the cops about Clutch after rescuing all of those chow, because if she really cared about them, she wouldn't want a chow abuser at large. I'm just instinctively baffled at the idea that all the heroes in the book don't keep each other informed of anybody who makes a threatening enemy out of one of them. They're too lazy to do that, even though it'd be so easy for bad guys to take advantage of this lack of information flow and get back at them through their friends. I guess they're just assuming that their enemies assume that they keep each other informed when they don't. But their enemies are always confident, so of course they underestimate them. I get her not thinking she needed to do a background check on him because he had the guts to approach her. You'd think Belle would have warned her about him since she works in the same building and is a coward, so she might have gotten afraid that he'd go here to get back at her, and it'd only take a Google search for him to find out Belle works here. The story was exhausting. So, he wanted the Chaotix away from Restoration HQ so they couldn't warn Jewel about him, I guess. Why else would he orchestrate this? But the Chaotix aren't a part of this place anyways, so they've never come here. Restoration is such a forgettable name that at first I called it the Resistance, and then I called it Reformation. In the next story, somehow General's wasting time having his hand on Tumble's face instead of simply punching him to knock him out immediately with his metal fist, and going on to knock out Ruff to instantly end this pathetically forced and unnecessary scene. Or for maximum enjoyment potential, just repeatedly punching them without knocking them out. After a plot hole like this, I don't care about what happens in the fight anymore. I know it's all unacceptable. At least Cream isn't bothered in the next page. But General doesn't deserve to be portrayed this disrespectfully. Was the artist depicting Cream hitting Tumble? Then why not show her fist impact him at the very least? Otherwise I'm just getting nothing out of this. Why wouldn't she just throw cheese at him like she did thousands of times? So it couldn't be canon to the games if it's actually expecting us to believe she's opposed to throwing her chow at people. Instead, she gets grabbed. Combine that with the story being spiteful enough to have her dinner burned while she blames herself, and it made some people wonder if the writers hate her. Fans hate her for her voice, so why don't they say that? Some flying chow humiliate Tomble by sending food at his head. Ruff is knocked to the floor. I wish I knew why. How did Cream get free? Why would Ruff say he won't rob the place after all, but still plan to trash him? He'd have free reign to rob it after he trashed him. Somehow the next panel just has them standing there instead of fighting. Cream gets the roast out and it gets stepped on, which was blatantly unnecessary. Maybe she shouldn't have taken it out of the oven. Maybe she should have known to just turn the oven off and put it back in for safekeeping, because this was bound to happen. Especially since Tomble was hit by food. Anytime I hear Cream talk, I hate her too. But that doesn't mean I find it satisfying to see bad stuff happen to her if it's insultingly forced. You don't have to put up with hearing her dialogue when you're writing her for a comic. And she's just a little girl, so I don't think I even want to see slaps against her. And that's all I'd recommend writing if you want to punish her for having a bad voice. But at that point, it'd be more tactful to not even use her at all. This doesn't just spite Cream. It spites Vanilla and the Chaotix too. And if the writer hates Vanilla's voice in Sonic X, then I get hating her. But why would you do this to Espio? You hate the Chaotix that much it's worth it to screw good characters over? Cream cries, and somehow the heartless thugs don't take advantage of the distraction by hitting General, who comforts her that it's good to remove the excess stress. Cream says she did everything right. No, she clearly made a mistake that got the roast ruined. Why the hell are Ruff and Tomble intimidated by Vanilla? She's just being soft-spoken, and she looks harmless. But somehow they agree with her. Literally anybody would say that doesn't make any sense. They're even more pathetic than Scratch and Grounder. They'd attack her and try to use her as a hostage too. The only way I can make sense of this is to assume they were terrified of their mother, but the writing is too lazy to explain that, or too uninspired to come up with it. Vector arrives apologizing for being late, as the heartless thugs are ashamed into, I guess, lying to her that they won't break the law anymore. It takes guts to actually keep true to that. It also might be a mistake, because they've got the most creative potential if they'd break any law they can. While the only other thing they do would be fighting robots, and that'd make them redundant. If they keep being criminals, they could break into the homes of other heroes, and maybe I'd get to see them get beaten up that time, giving the comic a reason to keep using them. Espio somehow expects me to believe the Chaotix are in no condition to fight. They literally never even got attacked. Vanilla reassures her and hugs her and holds her hand. It turns out they had Chinese food, so at least that's relatable. And for absolutely no reason, Ruff and Tumble get to have some. Any normal person would have told them to get the fuck out and call the cops. I understand her not doing the latter because she might think they'll go fight Eggman after this, and she might think the heroes need all the help they can get against Eggman because he's got so many robots. I don't think that'd make a difference. I think it'd have billions of robots. How's it better that Ruff and Tumble are here? The story shockingly ends with text saying that not only are the writers gonna actually remember to use Surgeon Kid again, but they'll finally reach their potential as good guys. About time. This should have happened right after their arc was over. I'll hate if it's temporary. It's baffling, and I take it with a grain of salt, but I'm sick of them as villains, so I can look on the bright side with this. Quite a while ago, I already got spoiled on the thugs overreacting to Vanilla instead of beating her up, and the plot point implied in the last few words. And I have the same reaction to them that I did back then. It's surprising and mind-boggling. The latter would be like if the Down Under Freedom Fighters let in a member of the Destructics as their new teammates because apparently the heroes never warned them about him. Even though Sally cared enough to get in contact with all the other countries as freedom fighters and told them so much that she told them about plots that were irrelevant to them. So no wonder the lack of information flow makes no sense in this comic. If Amy is Sally, why didn't she do that? Guess she's not Sally anymore. The first story by Ian Flynn somehow managed to screw up the concept of Knuckles wanting to beat up the Babylon rogues. We didn't see a single time where Jet and Storm got hit. It was interesting to see the variety of things that happened to each member because they all split up. But obviously Knuckles would have punched Jet before he'd get the chance to get airborne. Because he would have run faster than that, and he was almost right next to them. If he was this slow in the games, he wouldn't have made it past the first loop-de-loop. It's especially dumb since Espio probably uses super speed, so why didn't he beat up Storm? If you're gonna be different from the games, you need to be so in a good way, not in a way that's completely disrespectful to a beloved character. And having it not be faithful in a bad way feels dishonest for a comic that advertised itself as being like the games. Until it has a cover with just an OC on it. I shouldn't need to explain that we would have wanted to see Jet and Storm get hit a bunch of times because they're annoying. And it turns out Clutch really did hire them, which was the most lazy, predictable twist of all. Why is this supposed to make him look smart? As the only possible excuse for using him for this. I'm not even sure why he did it. It would have made more sense if it had been because he wanted to stare at the relics in his house because he did like antiques. When do the Chaotix and Knuckles ever visit Restoration HQ? The Chaotix are always busy with their job in another city, and Knuckles isn't antisocial and feels obligated to stay on Angel Island, and this place has nothing to do with him. At least the twist makes sense, but what would also make sense is a different villain. The second story by Evan Stanley continues the nonsense where General doesn't instantly knock out people despite having the perfect opportunity to punch them out right away, and being as fast as Sonic. It would have only been a good story if we saw him constantly punch them the entire time, until Vanilla got home. But instead it would rather focus on torturing Cream. It continues being cruel to Cream, which I can't help but see as bafflingly mean-spirited because she's a little girl. I get hating her voice, but I don't know if most Sonic fans would smirk at any suffering she goes through. Especially not in a comic where you can't hear her voice. And somehow Vanilla intimidates some burglars into saying they'll be good while barely putting any satisfying effort into it. At least show her threaten them with a frying pan. That'd be cool. It'd be surprising for her, but justified to protect her home. And isn't the series meant to be cool? This could have been brilliant if it immediately explained as soon as she came back that Rough and Tumble had a disciplinary mother that she's reminding them of. That would also subtly explain why they're criminals. Because since they're not the type of people that can properly handle that kind of parent, they ran away from her and became criminals because they dropped out of high school, so the only ones who would hire them for jobs they'd hate, which they knew. Anna explains why they stuck around to eat Chinese food, other than them just wanting to mooch off her. Because they'd want to bond with someone who reminds them of their mother. Because some people still have attachment to their abusive parents. Instead, it's jarring because they only act like this because of a distracting meta reason that they're meant to be seen as comedy villains, who stick out like a sore thumb in a comic that always takes itself seriously in the conflict. So this whole issue is just disrespectful to characters that deserved better, and the source material as the entire excuse for its plots. And I don't love looking at the art enough to not notice that. A lot of other franchises have good looking art styles, but that doesn't make it impossible for people to find some of their plots bad. Like The Great Divide in Avatar. So I don't understand why that's different in Sonic. I say this because the art is the only thing in the story that's worthy of great praise. Even the worst plots in the games didn't ignore the abilities of its main characters to make them lame enough that they could happen. Even they weren't disrespectful. I feel like if people really cared about Knuckles and General and Cream, they would think they deserved better than this.